marketplace skills are missionary skills.
So I was telling him last night, I was going over notes. I had prepared a message primarily about Joseph in the Old Testament and how God used him no matter where he was, even in prison. I scrapped the whole thing last night and really just felt led to share, like he said, my story of how I got to where I am and kind of the, for lack of a better term, the evolution of my understanding of what the call of God really is. And so, like he said, I'm at Eagle Creek, the Eagle Creek campus of Life Church, and my wife Danya and I, we have been in ministry for 24 years, and I did my Bible college internship at Eagle Creek 24 years ago with the founding pastor, Pastor Randy Blankenship, and it's a blessing to us today to be there. And I'd love to tell you more about how we got there, but that's a story for another time. My goal today is to give you all of this story in 20 minutes or less, okay? So, like I said, we've been in ministry for 24 years, and even though we've learned a lot along the way, the longer we go, we feel like the less we know. Anybody understand what I mean with that? But we've heard many people, perhaps you've said this before, we've heard many people in ministry kind of express this sentiment, you know, I've got to get financially independent, pay bills, save enough so that one day I can do ministry. And in their mind, that ministry is, you know, full-time vocational ministry. And can I just tell you, when pastors hear people say that, or at least I know when I hear people say that, Pastor Nathan, we kind of look at you and we think, you have access to people we may never have access to. And I like, you look at me and say, I wish I could do what you're doing. And sometimes I look at you and be like, I kind of wish I could do what you're doing, right? And so the paradigm is a little bit different, and we would love to be able to get in your sphere. But I want to talk about what I said, which is the call of God. And if you would have asked me at my start of my ministry journey, I would have told you what many told me. The call of God is to serve in full-time vocational ministry. And that's how I saw it. I see the call different. I've come to see the call differently over time, and I want to share how I got here today. So, I did not grow up in church. I was 15 when I came to Christ, and my parents didn't go to church, and I was at a very low point in my life, and for reasons that aren't pertinent today. But the only friends I had left were two Christians who continually invited me to church, and I thought, no, I'm not going to church. But eventually, of course, they kept going, and they wore me down, and I went. And it wasn't really the coolest youth ministry. You know, when we look at youth ministry today, you know, it's changing a little bit, but it's got to be heavily branded and look cool and have the cool music and have some video games and all that kind of stuff. Well, I went to the youth ministry. We worshiped with the grown-ups in the grown-up service. And then we were released to another classroom, which at the time was the Prims classroom. And if you know missionettes, you know that's a girls' ministry. So definitely not cool for teenagers. And we go into the Prims room, and it was just not necessarily all that fun, except for one thing. There was a girl there. So I kept going. You say, who was the girl? Doesn't matter. Not my wife. So, but eventually there was a youth rally, and the speaker asked the audience a very simple but powerful question that I want you to remember as I talk about this. The question was, are you right with God? And I didn't, like I said, I didn't grow up in church. I didn't have a theological degree. I didn't know all the church jargon. But I knew the answer to that was no. No, I'm not right with God. We are surrounded by people every day who, if they were asked and had a moment of truth, if they're right with God, they would come to that same conclusion. And it's that night that a volunteer led me to Jesus. Now, my parents immediately thought I was going to a cult. First of all, when we did go to church, it was Catholic. This was a Pentecostal church, and they were really weirded out by that. So they came to chicken on me from time to time. They let me continue going because they saw an improvement in the attitude. But eventually, in one of those times, they too gave their lives to Jesus. We got baptized together. And now today, they're helping run our hunger relief ministry at Eagle Creek. And so it's been a great journey, and I just love to see what's happening. Most people today, if you meet my parents, you meet me, wouldn't believe where we come from. But it was just a few months after my dad gave his life to Jesus, he lost his job. And I thought for sure he's going to blame this on God. I thought, man, he's going Lord, he just gave his life to you. How could you let this happen? And I prayed while he was on his way home because I didn't know how he was going to react. And he got home and he was really upset. It may have been the first time I actually saw him cry. So I just started reading verses to him. Who of you, by worrying, can add a single day of your life? And he came to and he looked up and he said, you should really think about being a pastor. And that was really where it hit me. And I had a conversation with my youth pastor at the time about what my dad said. And so my youth pastor took me to a conference, and I went to that conference. I came home. I was waiting for my ride home, and I was sitting alone in the sanctuary. And that's where I really felt like, oh, yeah, I feel like I'm called to ministry. Now, the path to ministry at that time, and maybe still for some today, was pretty straightforward. Finish high school, find a Bible college, get a ministry degree, find or plant a church, and live the rest of your life in ministry, preaching and teaching at the church. And sure, there are slight variances to that, right? Some focus on youth and some on missions or evangelism, which is more like revivalism. But most of us know if it's ministry, it's Bible college and the church ministry. And I followed that path perfectly. I graduated from high school after starting a very successful Bible club, I might add. And I went to the University of Valley Forge in Valley Forge, PA, and that's where I met my wife, who couldn't be here this morning. She's not feeling well. And I got my biblical studies degree there and went off into the sunset, into ministry. And we did youth ministry in New Jersey, in Virginia, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and, of course, back here in Indiana. I even had an amazing opportunity to go back to my home church in Newburgh, Indiana, with Pastor Troy. And we opened a student center there and had just amazing ministry there. I got to have school. I've shared this before with our church. I've got to have school assemblies where we were there. I went to my high school, and we had a school assembly, and the principal knew and loved the Lord and even said, hey, if you want to pray with students, you go right ahead. And so we were there during the school day at a public school, Harrison High School, and I was praying with students at my high school. It was very surreal and amazing. And it was just about that time that God was going to interrupt my understanding and school me on what his call really means. So a friend of mine came to me, one of the friends that helped me with the school assemblies, and he said, hey, I know a pastor who is in Massachusetts, Leominster, Massachusetts. It's spelled Leominster, but if you're from Massachusetts, it's Leominster, and if you have advanced New England speech disorder, it's Lemsta. So I wouldn't have called it a disorder there, but Anyways, he said, hey, my friend Paul is out here, and he's got a church of about 700. I think you should think about going there. And would you mind if I gave him your information? And it was knee-jerk. I was like, no, don't give him my information. I'm good. Do you see what's happening here, right? I'm at my home church running an amazing youth program that was every youth pastor's dream. And I just got out of this school assembly at my high school, and we had hundreds of students come to Christ. Why would I leave here to go to Massachusetts, which, by the way, is less than 2% evangelical? So my friend did what any friend would do. He gave Pastor Paul my information anyway. And Pastor Paul pursued Danya and I for 7 months. He asked 3 times if we would consider to go. He felt very strongly we were supposed to go there. And 3 times I told him, no. Sorry, no. Sorry, no. And finally, the 3rd time he said, well, we're going to have to move on, but if you change your mind, let me know. And suffice to say, we ended up conceding, and the Lord was in this for whatever reason we should go. And I remember my first ride there on my way, and it was just me. Danya and the kids were staying home in Newburgh, and I was going ahead of them to find a place to live. And I'm in the car, and I'm like, God, what is happening? I don't even know why I'm going here. And I'd love to tell you a light fell from the sky and said, I'm going to have you do this. And I still didn't know. I did ministry there, and I'll be honest with you, it was begrudgingly. I had very little space in my heart to build new relationships. God had grace and helped me with that. But the Holy Spirit was patiently working on me and opening my eyes to things I didn't see or understand before. The problem was, all I could think about is, when are you going to let me go back to Indiana? And the funny thing is, people that became close to us, we ran a college internship program. We were real close to this place called North Point Bible College. And they could not understand why, when I lived near Boston and the beach and the mountains and all these historical landmarks, why would you want to go back to flat, flyover country, Indiana? Like literally, I think one of them actually said that, and they didn't understand this. So it wasn't until North Point Bible College invited me to speak, and they wanted me to speak on the call of God at the school. So I worked on that message, and you may know this or not, but when your pastor or somebody's writing a message, very often it's something that God's doing inside your pastor. So I wrote the message. It didn't really hit me in its entirety until I spoke to the college students. And it was about the call of God, not a thing you do or a place you go, but a person you are. And I wrote that. As I spoke it all was coming back to me, right? That they needed not to be concerned with a ministry or a vocation or a location, but who God was calling them to be. And that way, no matter where they were or what they were doing, they could always answer the call of God. And in real time, the message was hitting me as I was speaking it. Because up to that point, it really had been about that. And it was like God was saying to me the whole time, Mike, are you pursuing my call or a career? Which is an odd thing when you look at the Bible, a career in ministry. Even saying it at the time, it was weird. And I never doubted for a minute up to that moment God's hand was in what we did. So it wasn't like, everything you've done to this point is a career. However, conveniently, it did feel like positive career moves. Those were amazing times. And Pastor Paul, at the time, he would repeat this often. He would say, the journey is as important as the destination. Anybody ever heard that before? And I began to look at ministry with an entirely different lens. It wasn't long after that, and stick with me here, that my pastor, Pastor Paul, announced his retirement. At which time I thought, oh, goody, I get to move back to Indiana. Yes. That's not what happened. That's not what happened at all. We ended up going to a church in Providence, Rhode Island, and the church was down to about 15 members, and the building was really not in good shape. And I remember Paul telling me, Mike, don't look at the barn, look at the fields. It was really good advice. He was right. He was right, but man, that barn, it was bad. And so I broke just about every convention that you could. They say first-year pastor, don't make any major changes. We did a whole lot of changes that year. And we did have a quick bump in attendance, which made it easier for me when I met with the board and said, hey, I'd like to go outside the church, and I'd like us just to walk up to the church like you've never been here before and try to see this from outside eyes. And so they did that, and it didn't take much convincing after that. Oh, yeah, we need to fix this. This is not a place. If you don't know, if you're not part of this church family, it's not something I would feel comfortable bringing my family to. So now the church was small, but we had a healthy budget, and there were generous people there. And so we put together a plan and watched that plan get executed, but the progress on the updates and the upgrades were crawling for budgetary reasons. And so on top of that, they were paying me a full-time salary, but I got really impatient, and I figured, hey, if we could stop paying me, we could get these things done in no time. And maybe we go back to paying me after that, but I want to get this stuff done. And the board at first was really uncomfortable with this. In fact, one of them said to me, oh, the most important thing we could do with our budget is pay our pastor. And there's some people who believe that, and I think rooted in that is, you want to honor your pastor, and I agree with that, but I don't know that that's the most important thing a church can do, is pay their pastor. And we walked through that, but after some time, we cut my salary there drastically, and while still pastoring, I became a bivocational pastor and picked up a job at Apple, as he mentioned, in downtown Providence. I don't think I hear the term bivocational outside of the church world very much. Sometimes when I say it to somebody that's not in church world, they kind of look at me like I'm crazy, What does bivocational mean? You're bi what? So it refers It refers to a pastor. Obviously, most of the time, the church can't afford a salary, but that wasn't the situation here. They could afford it, and they were doing it, and they loved me, and it was awesome, but this was a choice me and the board made together so that we can get things done. And of course, things did get done rapidly. We had very quick progress. But something bigger was going on in my heart at the time. God was driving the point home. I really enjoyed my job at Apple. In fact, my son and I, we went to Apple this last Sunday to get a Vision Pro demonstration. Anybody see those things? Super cool, way too expensive. But anyways, we were there, and I was talking to the person showing us that, I really miss working here. And my son Ethan said, you should get a job here. You had really good discounts. Maybe you get one of these Vision Pros if you work here. So, but my time in what we'll say, quote, the real world, it also made me a better pastor. Not just at church, though. And this is where I started to learn more about the call of God. I had amazing opportunities to talk and pray for people that never would have come to my church. And one of my bosses, I'll just tell you one of the stories, one of my bosses who was openly pagan and enthusiastically pagan, we'll say even, one day she came back to the genius room, and that's where I worked because I'm a genius. So they use that term loosely at Apple. But she came back there, and she's bawling her eyes out. And all of us, when we worked there, we were doing hardware repair, and we had these little bracelets that we connected to a mat. It kept us grounded so we didn't have any static electricity while we were working on the electronics. And so everybody was really kind of tied down to their work. But I saw this and thought, man, she's really messed up right now. So I detached myself from my mat, and I went and I said, hey, Laura, what's wrong? She kind of wiped her face. She said, my brother-in-law is 28, just died of a massive heart attack unexpectedly. I said, wow, that's really hard. And I did something I didn't realize at the moment was either really brave or really stupid. I asked my pagan boss if I could pray for her. And her response could have been anything, but what happened next is when it all came together for me. She stopped and she looked at me and she said, you would do that for me? That was her reaction. So I didn't know at first what she thought I was going to do, and I said, yes, of course, Lord, I'll do that. I am going to be praying to Jesus, though, okay? So you know. And she said, yes, that's okay. And we prayed. And she calmed down. And from that day on, she would say, I love it when you're here. There's peace in this place. And we would have conversations every week in, week out, about where that peace really came from. And it wasn't me. It was Jesus, right? And there were many encounters like that. There were even customers that I talked with that I got to pray with. And I never got in trouble at Apple for doing that, by the way. And I quickly discovered, and this is where it really hits home, I was no less a pastor answering my call at Apple than I was at the church. God called me to be a pastor, not do pastoral ministry. And I was still being a pastor. And the call of God is to be, not to do. He's calling you no matter what you do, no matter where you are, what you're doing, what station in life, and coming or going, you can always answer the call of God. And it was that night, and I'm going to wrap this up here, and this is where I really want to encourage you. It was that night after I got back that I prayed with Laura. I came home and I sat in prayer. Everybody else was in bed. And God started to remind me of all the people he put in my life that got me to where I was. It was that volunteer who led me to Jesus. He was a contractor. And after he led me to Jesus, he would bring me on jobs with him. And he would talk to me about what it meant to be a follower of Christ. He introduced me to a woman who was a general manager at a Dairy Queen and hired me to work there. And she would pray with me every week. Imagine that, a boss at Dairy Queen. The rest of the people thought we were weird, but she would pray with me. There was another gentleman at my church who began and owned a local internet service provider. That was back in the day, by the way, that was all dial-up. You remember dial-up, you know? It was Evansville Online. And he hired me, and he would talk to me about dreams and his dream that God gave him to start this internet provider and how God's using him. And it was him and 5 other men. And then he would talk to me about how God will give me dreams and put dreams in my heart. There was another board member that hired me, to, believe it or not, to be a lifeguard and to help him manage some of his properties, probably more the latter than the first. So, and he would love to talk to me about godly stewardship. Then there was another pastor who ran a landscaping business, another bivocational pastor, and he gave me some work, and he would love to talk to me about the analogies between planting good landscaping and planting seeds of the gospel. And the list goes on. It was like God was showing me something that was starting to come together. If the call of God was relegated only to vocational ministry, I would not be here today. There were all these points. Now, the church did a lot for me. Pastor Troy is still my pastor today. I would not be here if not for what God's doing in him too. But there were a number of people from then to now, even today, that have poured into my life to help make me who I am, the person that God's calling me to be. And if we confined that to the church, it never would have happened. So when I hear someone say, well, someday what I do will matter. Someday, I'm just doing this to get by and pay bills. But someday, maybe when I retire, then I could do ministry. And I found a lot of fulfillment, a lot more fulfillment after that. Fast forward to today. We came to Life Church Eagle Creek from Rhode Island, which is what I've wanted to do all along. And I'm glad that we're here. And there's a story there, and that's a story for another time. Life Church is a multi-site church. Pastor Nathan Peternell is the lead pastor. And when he hired me, I told him all that I just told you and my time at Apple. And I said, I think it would be good for every pastor to take time every few years at least and work outside the church. Because just a side note, we need to get a perspective outside the church sometimes. I had been in ministry for 16 years before I went to Apple, and it all had been in the church. And so God showed me a lot of things in that time. And I said, at the very least, Nathan, this is something I want to do again. I want you to know this is something I want to do again. This was in 2017. And he said, okay, but not this year, please. We were just kind of renovating and revitalizing Eagle Creek, and it really wouldn't have been a time for me to do that. But 6 years later, an opportunity was laid before me to work where I work right now, Homeland Security. And Pastor Nathan has been very gracious to allow me to do this and still preach and teach at Eagle Creek. You know, it's totally unconventional for a pastor to do that. And don't misunderstand me. There's great value in full-time pastoral ministry. Everything I'm sharing with you, this is something God's done in me. And so don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm not saying all pastors should be bivocational, but this is something, like I said, God was doing in me. And so this opportunity came, and he was gracious enough to allow me to do that. And I'm still pastoring, not just at Eagle Creek. There are people in different places and different levels of leadership in this country that I've had the opportunity to pray with, and it's been unbelievable. It's amazing, right? Somebody who loves the Lord, that goes to our church, he kind of said to me when all this happened, he, like with a side eye, like, so you work for the government now? Huh, just like that. And I said, yeah, you know, God wants to have people everywhere. He needs to have people everywhere, and he does. And if you're living for him and you're seeking him, you'll be right where he wants you to be. Don't ever think that someday I'll be able to answer the call. You answer the call today. We are all called to leverage whatever life we have for the kingdom of God. And there were so many in my life, as I shared, that brought me along the way, that were part of my discipleship, that were in the marketplace. And if they hadn't been in the marketplace, I'm 100% sure I would not be here today. And you've got to answer the call. There's a kid like me who depends on it. There's a man, there's a woman, there's a family counting on you to be fully engaged in the call of God in your life right now, right where you are. Because the next person wrestling with the question that was posed to me when I was 15, are you right with God, may never find themselves in my church or in a youth rally, but they may already be in your sphere of influence. And if you're obsessed over someday, you'll miss it. You'll miss it. So I chose to do this. Eric told me, we met and he said, I can't believe you're doing this. You said that, and I thought, yeah, sure, you got the dream, your full-time ministry. But no, there are some of us who choose to be bivocational because of all the reasons I just said. And God is gracious. What I do at the church informs what I do at Homeland Security. What I do at Homeland Security informs what I do at the church. And I wouldn't have it any other way. So wherever you are, of course, be a strong presence in your church. Get involved in your church. Do those things. Support that pastor. Support that ministry. Support missions. All those things. But don't forget about what's right around you. Bring it with you. I think that's what you said. Bring it with you wherever you go. God gave you this life. And that's your calling. And I want to say thank you. I look around here and I think of those people that led me. And I really appreciate that there's more people in this world who say, I want to be like that. I want to serve like that. You have no idea how significant you are. And I'm just honored to be here with you today. So thank you.